Hi, Andrea Morissette Grazzini here with Me2We Media. I'm delighted and honored to be speaking with the world-renowned author Riane Eisler. She's here and is going to share her wisdom on cross-sector or constructivist engagement, ways of building our world that are partnered rather than polarized. So thank you very much for joining us. I want to share, for those of you who don't make the connection, Riane is known for her number of books. She's written 10 books at least, and very well known for The Chalice and the Blade, which deals with gender continuum, what I might call the gender continuum, or different gendered people, males and females finding their power and strength together. And as well, she's author of Real Wealth of the Nations, which takes that theory further and connects the dots between all different types of people, all different types of organizations, including faith organizations, businesses, community organizations, and all different types of change agents. She's the president of the Center for Partnership Studies in California, and she's still doing amazing work. But really, what I want to understand, if we can, is where did this all start? And I know that you were a child in Nazi Germany and that your family fled to Cuba. Can you share a little bit about that story of your childhood and how that connects to the work that you're doing and you've been doing for so many years?
Well, I have a great deal of passion for this work, and it really is, as you mentioned, very deeply rooted in my own early childhood, because I was born in Europe at a time that, in terms of the new vocabulary for describing societies introduced in my work, was a regression to a rigid domination system. It was the rise to power of the Nazis, first in Germany and then in my native Austria. So from one day to the next, my whole world was rent asunder. We managed, my parents and I, by a hair's breadth, to escape. We were able to get to Cuba, which was one of the few places where Jewish refugees were being admitted. And I grew up in the industrial slums of Havana. Again, my parents, the Nazis confiscated, that's an official term for armed robbery, everything my parents owned. So I grew up in great poverty. I saw this huge gap between haves and have-nots, in addition to having witnessed as a very young child a great deal of cruelty and violence, all of which led me to the questions that my research then sought to answer, questions that I think most of us have asked at a certain point in our life. Does it have to be this way? Does there have to be so much cruelty, so much insensitivity, so much injustice, so much violence? Is it, as we're sometimes told, just human nature, inevitable? Or are there alternatives? And if so, what are they? And it was really these questions that eventually, many years later, led to my multidisciplinary cross-cultural historical research.
So you were a young child, but were you 10 or early preteen when you moved to Cuba?
No, I was 6 years old.
You were little, okay. So then very much your formative years were in Cuba, but you were old enough to have memories, I'm sure, of your family in Austria. So I want to get to what you found about interdisciplinary partnering and how, if that works and how it works. I'm biased to believe it does, and I'm sure you do as well. But I want to just ask probably the obvious question. So you saw some horrible things, and you saw real disparities, and you experienced them as a child in 2 countries, not just one. How is it that a person comes out of that without bitterness, without anger towards the oppressive class or the oppressive people?
Well, it isn't that I came out of it without anger. I was very angry as I grew up, but I've been able to channel that anger. And I mean, if we're not angry, if we're not outraged at injustice and cruelty, there's something wrong.
Right. Right.
So, but I was able to channel it in a constructive way. And I should add that that really didn't happen until another pivotal experience in my life, which was in the late 60s, when I woke up as if, along with thousands of other women, asleep from a long drug sleep, to realize that a lot of problems I thought were something is wrong with me, just personal problems, that they were really social problems because I shared them with all these other women.
Right.
And so I threw myself into the women's liberation movement of that time.
And so I'm guessing that Betty Friedan factored into your thinking. So she was the one that sort of discovered a hidden reality that all women, or many women, sensed something was missing in their lives. And it had to do not necessarily with the bad men, but it just had to do with this disconnection between who a woman was in her heart and soul and sort of how she felt she needed to act in public and how social norms were prescribed for women to act. Is that?
Well, I knew Betty, and I liked her, but no, she really didn't.
Okay.
What figured for me was something else. It was really that my training is not only in social and systems science, but also in law. And I became outraged. Excuse me.
You've got an awful cold. Thank
I've
you
got a
very
terrible
much for
cold.
joining us.
I became outraged at the discriminatory laws. And so I founded the first center on women in the law in the United States, the Los Angeles Women's Center Legal Program. And at that time, people would say, well, what does that mean, women in the law? But it wasn't on our radar. But what it meant was that as late as 1969, I had to write a friend of the court brief to the Supreme Court of the United States arguing the then radical idea that women should be considered persons under the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause.
Thank you.
And, that is what drove me. I mean, this palpable injustice. But it was also something else. I wrote, I threw myself into this. I wrote 2 books, really on women and the law, one drawing from my experience as a family law attorney, the other one drawing from my experience on constitutional law. It was the only mass paperback on the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA handbook, the Equal Rights Handbook. But when that amendment failed, it became very clear that as essential as laws are, and there are places in the world today where we are still working like much of Southeast Asia, Pakistan, Bangladesh doesn't even have laws on the books condemning violence against women and families. But as important as laws are, that what we're really talking about is the need for a cultural transformation. And then the question was, transformation from what to what? Because it was clear that right, left, you have terrible regimes on both sides. Religious, secular, the same. Capitalist, socialist, the same. Eastern, Western, the same. And so that really led me back to the questions of my childhood. And it was like, and I started a study using a methodology, the study of relational dynamics, which is very different from most studies of society, which are quite aptly called the study of man, right? And of course we're told, don't worry, man includes woman. Actually, the English word woman includes man. But that's not the point. The point was that if you leave out of your database no less than half of humanity, you're not going to see the whole picture. So you can't see the configuration of the picture. And what then happened is that it was possible using this gender holistic approach to connect the dots and to see something that I have written about, have spoken about at the United Nations General Assembly, at the State Department, because my job is to really get these ideas not only to the convinced,
Those are the people who have no.
And you create new language, is my take.
I do create
yes,
new
and that's
language,
important.
and we
Why?
need new language for new thinking.
Right, right.
And basically, my work shows that what's good for women is good for the world.
Right.
What's bad for women is bad for the world, and that as long as women are devalued, which they are in domination systems, which are these rigid rankings of man over man, man over woman, race over race, religion over religion.
Sort of binary systems.
Well, as long as that prevails, we are not going to have societies guided by caring values. Why? Because caring, caregiving, and nonviolence are in domination systems because we have very rigid gender stereotypes associated only with the subordinate, devalued women. And real men are not supposed to embrace them. So I began to really apply my training as a systems scientist and introduced, as you said, new language, because as long as we have these right-left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western categories, we don't have systems. None of them recognize the foundational importance in shaping nothing less than children's brains, as we know from neuroscience, of those foundational woman-man, parent-child, early relations. And that's what my work shows. So it's a gender holistic way of cultural transformation.
And how has it gone? So what have been the adventures in this? It seems perfectly logical. We're interdependent. We really don't do well as a species with one another, right? I'm the mother of a son. I have a father I love, and many male colleagues. I don't do so well without them, and I'd like to think that some of them don't do so well without me. And not only in the traditional roles. I co-founded a company with a man. He happened to be politically my opposite and gender-wise my opposite. But we built a company, and it did well. So I think I'm convinced, but there's times I kind of feel like I may be the odd duck. So how did it go? How has it gone? What has been the evolution of your theories, and how have you seen them played out?
Well, first of all, I've done a lot of my teaching and cultural change work by writing. The Chalice and Blade is now in 25 foreign languages, and it is coming out this year in Turkish. It's just acquired by Turkish publishing house. My other books are also all drawing from this study. Are also all still in print. One of my later books has been The Real Wealth of Nations, Creating a Caring Economy. I also...
Which, if I can just interrupt for a moment, what I thought was remarkable about Wealth of Nations was you were endorsed not by one side or the other, but by all sides. So Peter Senge, as well as Gloria Steinem, as well as Desmond Tutu. And so there's this broad cross-sector buy-in to your theories and belief and really more than buy-in.
Well, it's enthusiasm. But you see, look, I mean, first of all, you said you have a son. I have grandsons, and I'm also married to a wonderful, caring man. So this is not a question of women against men or men against women. It's a question of domination systems and of gender stereotypes. The receptivity, as you say, to my work really transcends the conventional categories. I can't claim that I've managed to do what I want, which is to change the world. On the other hand, we are, for example, today at the University of Minnesota, we launched a new interdisciplinary journal of partnership studies, which is really, we invite not only academics, but also practitioners and activists to really bring this body of knowledge together. We need new words, a new lexicon. We need new thinking. And words are traps. I mean, consider the categories of matriarchy and patriarchy. They're really two sides of the domination coin, aren't they? So the partnership system and the domination system a really new vocabulary. So is caring economy. So are hierarchies of domination as contrasted to what there are in partnership systems, which are hierarchies of actualization. Power is not that.
Right. Power is important in actualization, in self-actualization, and in social actualization.
Absolutely, but in domination systems, power is the blade in terms of the title of the chalice and the blade. In the partnership system, it's more the chalice, the power not to take and control and but or to dominate, but the power to give, nurture, and illuminate life.
Which is critical, and yet it can be absent of some of that action of the blade, of that need to to take immediate action, because in a chalice society or situation, we want to be more measured, which is wonderful, and there's moments when measured isn't quick enough or something. So it's a real challenge.
But wait.
Go
I
ahead.
have to stop you there.
You stop me.
Because we don't need the blade for action.
Okay.
We can take action, and we do all the time, without the blade. In fact, when we take action with the blade, we really are not solving problems, we're creating problems. So if you're talking about quick action, yes, and that's why I make a distinction between hierarchies of domination and hierarchies of actualization. You can use empowering power, which is the power of the chalice, much more effectively than disempowering power, which is the power of the blade. And it can be just as quick. That doesn't mean we need
and it tends to be more sustained. Am I right? So that empowered power tends to be more sustained. You see people like Bill George, the former CEO of Medtronic, and who's now at Harvard, a businessman, talking about the importance of, I think he would probably use the word chalice-type leadership in organizations.
Well, that's part of the movement towards the partnership side of the continuum. No society is a pure partnership or domination system, but just read in the management literature that the manager should no longer be the cop or controller, the domination manager, but somebody who inspires, facilitates, and empowers rather than disempowers. That can be very quick, that kind of action. So we don't really need the blade except to cut bread.
We should cut bread to share together, right? So, I mean, this is really important, because what we see in this country is we had a president that was elected in 2008 with a we the people kind of theme, right? And we got into the system, quote unquote, and that sort of faded in a little bit. And I think some of us forgot. I don't want to it's not time to assess how the president's done, but the fact is that was the chalice thinking, and then the blade thinking sort of came in, which is the way that often our government works. What's missing then is we tended to look at government or the president or maybe the heads of organizations as being the only one with the right answer. So this is again a hierarchical system, and as a CEO, that scares the bejeebers out of me, because it's impossible for any one person or even one group to make all the right decisions.
Well, you're talking about complex systems change, first of all. And unfortunately, President Obama has not used his bully pulpit power to really change thinking, to change the vocabulary, to really change and look at what are root causes rather than just dealing with symptoms. And the root causes are always, take for example economics, which is what the real wealth of nations is about. We hear a great deal about the evils of unregulated capitalism. They certainly are real problems. But this is not new. This is domination economics, a so-called neoliberal trickle-down supply-side economics. It's really domination economics where trickle-down economics is very old. It's where the people, mass of the people are brainwashed to content themselves with the scraps falling from the opulent tables of those above, And where freedom is used by those in control as freedom to do whatever they want without, including ruining our natural environment, without being accountable. Now, that is feudal, that is mercantilist, that is Eastern, that is Western, that is Northern, that is Southern. And as for socialism, the two mass applications, large-scale applications, in both the former Soviet Union and China, I mean, not to speak of the authoritarianism and the violence, which are part of the domination system, their environmental problems are horrific. So we need a different way of thinking about economics. Unfortunately, our leaders have not chosen to really change the conversation. And I'm going to tell you, this is a fatal flaw, and I'm really hoping that the groups that are working on all these different pieces of the elephant, if you will, can unite in a partnership movement. Why? Caring economy is integral to a partnership system. It can't happen without the other. It has to be that transformation. But we're moving into the post-industrial, we're in it, knowledge service age. We have to redefine what is productive work, because not only the environment is making a consumer-based economy antiquated, but it's also automation, robotics, artificial intelligence. What is the work that only humans can do? Caring for people starting in early childhood, caring for our mother first. So if we can continue to do everything we're doing, but also join the Caring Economy campaign. And for those who are interested, the website is caringeconomy.org. And just this week, next week, there's another wonderful launch. We're launching new measures of economic success called Social Wealth Economic Indicators, which look at human capacity development as the most important investment for a prosperous and equitable economy. So we're starting with where the decision makers are. And the United States is way behind other developed nations in fundamentals, early childhood education, that so-called women's work, right? Caregiving support, again, that so-called women's work, whether it's a woman or a man, and more men are doing it. So paid parental leave, we're the only developed nations without nationally funded paid parental leave. So our social wealth economic indicators are launching online through Google Hangouts. They will be recorded. The panel is moderated by Carol Evans, who is the president of Working Mother. We have on our panel some fabulous people. We have a top executive at Cardinal Health, which is a Fortune 500 company. We have to get these people in there.
Absolutely. And then the question is, so I look at society as tips and roots, and I always am wondering, how can we connect tips and roots? So it's, it's cross-sector, but it's also, so roots would be, those of us that are working every day at our less glamorous jobs and, taking home somewhat less glamorous or a lot less glamorous paycheck and so forth, and maybe not in academia, not in politics, but we still have something to offer. How does the rest of us get engaged in that system that you're proposing?
Well, we have webinars, for one thing, which are wonderful. We have two kinds of webinars. One are webinars for caring economy leaders. And they are very affordable, and we do give scholarships for people who can't even afford that. And basically, it's not only the data, but it's a whole new way, which provides answers and solutions. The other thing is we have cultural transformation webinars, which really sort of connect a lot of the dots and make it possible for progressives Because it isn't just regressives.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Regressives get it. For them, it's always a top priority. You know, whether it was Hitler in Germany, Stalin in the Soviet Union, Khomeini in Iran, fundamentalists, so-called religious fundamentalists, always a top priority to get women back into their, quote, traditional or subservient place, in their, quote, traditional family, which is a code word for a rigidly male-dominated, highly punitive family where kids learn it's very painful to question orders, no matter how unjust or irrational. If we don't address these fundamental issues, which they do, we're not going to move forward. So progressives, we really need to educate ourselves as progressives to no longer marginalize these so-called women's and so-called children's issues. They are the foundations, and without them, domination systems will keep rebuilding themselves, whether they're religious, whether they're secular, whether they're Eastern, whether they're Western. That's why this whole new lexicon, this whole new language, and this whole new conceptual framework is so powerful.
And I think that we're seeing evidence that this framework is starting to be instilled in social norms, in fact. And the most sort of amazing transformation I saw this fall was around the NFL's issues with domestic violence or gender violence and interpersonal violence. I have to say, having been, quote unquote, having experienced gender violence, I was thrilled that the NFL was where this happened because I knew that they had a powerful voice and it gave us something concrete to deal with. What blew my mind was how citizens drove with their anger at how the NFL was handling the problem. They drove the sponsors, the economic component, to make choices that made the NFL wake up to a certain extent. What I'm thrilled further with seeing is the idea that women and men are working together. Finally,
Absolutely.
This was a transformation.
That's the partnership model, isn't it? You know, I'm always so delighted when I get a lot of mail, and people after I speak, because I keynote a lot of conferences, come up to me and say that my books have transformed their lives. But I'm the most thrilled when men come up to me, or women come up and say, "My father gave me this book." Or my brother gave me your book and it changed my life. This is why we have to change the language to talk about the partnership rather than domination system. That's the basics. And I want to talk for a moment about what you mentioned, which is violence against women and children. These are old, entrenched traditions of domination. These are not accidental.
And they're not. And we have, going back to your years in this, when you were really focused on the law, we have laws against in this country, certainly, and most Western countries. We have very decent laws. The problem is they don't work. So this is a social issue. Am I right?
We're back to the cultural transformation, but I do want to say something because we're in Minnesota. The Duluth program, yes. I'm co-chair. I belong to a lot of international organizations. One of them is the World Future Council, and I'm the co-chair of their commission to stop violence against girls and women. And we just had a meeting with the European Parliament and with other organizations. And the Duluth program got the first prize as an example. You know, their community, their community response program, as an example of a policy that works. But we have to do more than that, because the problem is that people must be held accountable. And in so many world regions, I mean, I work with women from all over the world. One of my colleagues is a woman in Kenya working against in fact, she's one of the on the board of the a new journal of interdisciplinary journal of partnership studies, Kirumbu Abuya. She was genitally mutilated, and she is now working against it. This is what has to happen, because look, if children see the use of violence in their families, they learn a very important lesson, which is that it's okay, even quote moral, to use violence to impose your will on others. So again, we're back to connecting the dots. And I want to really speak to progressives about this, because the tendency for many, many people who consider themselves progressives is still to marginalize these issues and say, oh, well, first we have to work on the important things. Well, that's nonsense. These are the important things.
Right. These are at the core of the important things.
These are at the foundation.
Preventing violence and keeping families and children healthy isn't core. I don't know what it could be.
Well, it's no coincidental matter that those societies where violence against women and children is still traditionally and religiously very often condoned are also, if you look around the world, societies that are more warlike, where cruelty is more acceptable, and that are much more unequal and authoritarian. I mean, I'm thinking about the failure, and it was a failure of the Arab Spring. Why? Because the foundations weren't addressed. So who did they elect? They elected the Muslim Brotherhood, yet another authoritarian regime. And so if we don't address the foundations, and that's what this work is about, and it's very exciting, and I want to invite all of our listeners to really integrate this into your work. Come to our launching of the social wealth economic indicators, because these are, I mean, they are what's been missing. Even the new alternatives to GDP do not take into account the economic value of this so-called women's work. And you know, women and children are the mass of the world's poor and the poorest of the poor, because that work is so poorly paid in the market and in most world regions doesn't have policy support.
And yet nonprofits and NGOs are funding microgrants for women because there's a belief that women are more responsible sometimes.
And yet, at the same time, these microgrants don't go very far. It's like,
right.
I mean, I hate to say
no, you're preaching to the choir. We're trying to raise money.
Yeah.
And what we're finding is, you know, you can get small money, but to really build change, you need meaningful income. And a small microgrant can only change so much.
What you need is a lot of perseverance, a lot of determination, courage. You know, I recently got a Pioneer Award, and I said, yeah, it's exciting to be a pioneer, and I'm glad you're honoring me, but know that it's also frustrating to be ahead of your time.
Yes.
Well, what I'm seeing now is that time seems to be catching up a little.
Good.
Well, the Interdisciplinary Journal of Partnership
Absolutely,
Studies,
yes.
very much to my colleague, Teddy Potter.
This was somewhat unheard of not long ago, too,
Well,
especially in academia and all
the
challenges.
social wealth economic indicators.
Absolutely.
The fact that I get invited to speak at the United Nations General Assembly, usually the only woman in that particular conversation, and the only one who will talk about, I was on a panel on the environment, and it was really a joke. And they were very nice, wonderful people, some of whom I know and adore. Were doing fabulous work, but not one of them spoke about poverty. Not one of them spoke about women or children. It was like, what planet are we living?
A sense of denial of if we don't talk about it, we
But
don't have
these
to
were
deal
all
with it.
progressives. No, it's not a sense of denial. It's that their paradigm is still
Is to fit into the old model.
It's still the old
And
model.
this is the truth. And so that, and it's not, and women, in fact, have also struggled with this paradigm of trying to be like the male model, which I personally reject, you know.
Well, let's not call it the male model. Let's call it the
that's
domination model.
Thank you.
Because women can be just,
Absolutely.
I mean, you know,
That's wonderful, yeah.
Sarah Palin,
I mean, you're right.
etc.
And it's not fair to
But women as a bloc. Now, this is something, the countries that have moved most to the partnership side of the continuum, which are Nordic nations like Sweden, Finland, and Norway, have caring policies, but they have 40% of their national legislature is female. They vote for caring policies, but not only that. As the status of women rises, men no longer find it such a difficult thing to embrace these more soft priorities. And we see that in the men who are doing fathering today. Only, you know, the way that it
there's a sense of liberation in these men,
That's
right?
right.
And it's just delightful. And they are, you can tell it, it's like, you know.
So I want to invite our viewers, our listeners, use your organizations to really spread this.
Absolutely.
Because without a new paradigm, a really new paradigm, and a new vocabulary, and new tools like the webinars we have, and the new economic, social wealth economic indicators we have, we are going to stay on the margins.
And what WetheP does, we will definitely be sharing this with all of our audience, but we will do what we can as well with technology. We provide tools that allow groups to come together and to connect with one another across disciplines. So we'll do our little part to support the amazing work that you've led, and we're really grateful that you took your time to meet with us and share all of this exciting stuff. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.